Hi BookTube, it's Amy. So I'm here to do the World Book Day tag. I was tagged earlier today by Sean D. Standfast, and I believe the tag was originally created by Steve Donahue also earlier today. And I think today is technically World Book Day. So the first question asks about what country I call home and have I lived here all my life. So I of course live in Canada and I was born here. I was born in southern Ontario, which is a very tiny portion of Ontario on the map. And if you've ever seen a map of Ontario, Ontario is huge. And there's this little bit that goes down between the Great Lakes, and that is what we call southern Ontario. But you can drive for 8 hours and not get out of southern Ontario. In fact, I still live in southern Ontario, and if I were to drive straight through to my parents' place, it would take 7 hours. And from there, it's still over an hour to Niagara Falls. So, oh, my laptop went to sleep. I need to see the questions, but yeah, I was born in a small town here in Ontario, and I lived there up until a month after my 22nd birthday when I moved out here to Ottawa. And so my reading taste has very much been shaped by where I lived and where I've grown up. The next question here asks, how many countries have you visited? Did you buy books there? So apart from Canada, I've only ever actually been to the United States. North America is, of course, huge countries here. And if you want to travel anywhere else, you really have to go by plane, which means you have to have some money to go by plane. But I have family on my mother's side in the States, and so I've been down into New York and to Indiana. And I should point out the rural point of New York. I've never been anywhere near New York City. But every time I've gone to the States to visit family, I have made some stops at bookshops. When I was a kid and a teenager, it was always fun to go to Barnes and Noble because we don't have that here in Canada. But I also like to make some stops at used bookstores, and I think that's partly where I got my love of shopping for used books, by going to used bookstores in New York State. In recent years, one of my favorite shops to visit when I go down is a little shop called the Book Vault in Endicott, New York, not far from the town where my grandparents live. And so that's always a fun shop to go to, and they've got cats in that bookshop. The next question asks, how well is the world represented in your personal book collection? So unfortunately, not very well. I only read English, so of course I only have books in English, and a lot of my collection is made up of American literature, British literature, Irish literature, and of course Canadian literature. And I do have books in translation. The vast majority of those are books originally published in French, either in France French or in Canadian Quebecois French. And so the next question here is asking, how many works in translation do you currently have, not including canon? And so canon would be anything, I guess, that we would consider a classic. So not Dumas, not Balzac, not Flaubert, those don't count as works in translation here. But if you put aside the canon works, I did a quick count and I have about 70, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I only have about 300 or so books in my collection at this point. So that is a sizable chunk, I would say. Question 5 asks me to tell you some weird facts about my country. So I did some thinking about this beforehand. Weird facts about my country. So there are more people living in the American state of California than in the entire country of Canada. And most of us here in Canada actually live within 100 kilometers of the US-Canada border. We want to be close to where the commerce is, and when you start getting north, it gets cold. It's just nicer to live farther south, farther towards the 49th parallel. Sudbury has a giant nickel. Maybe I will leave a link to this in the description below, but when I think of weird facts about Canada, I think of Sudbury's giant nickel. It is quite literally a giant nickel, like the coin. The Canadian nickel has a beaver on it. A giant nickel on the edge of the city. I've never seen it in person, but I've heard tales of it. Another weird fact. Canada has a queen. There is a Queen of Canada. She is, of course, the same queen, Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom, but Canada is formerly a British colony, also formerly a French colony, but that's a whole nother story, but formerly a British colony. And of course, the Queen isn't here in Canada to serve as our daily head of state and to sign bills and to act as a representative. So we have a Governor General who is appointed by the Prime Minister for a set term. And our current Governor General is Julie Payette, who is a former astronaut. So interesting, strange fact. All our legislation, all our bills are signed off on by a former astronaut before they become law. Another weird fact. Within Ontario, you can go from London to Paris, to Stratford, to Scarborough, without ever leaving the province. A lot of cities and towns within Ontario, within Canada, are named after famous European cities. Kitchener, which is near where I grew up, actually used to be called Berlin. And during World War I, they hastily changed the city name from Berlin to Kitchener. There is a large German heritage in that area, hence the Berlin. But it became Kitchener after a famous British figure. And so yeah, when my colleague says to me that she's from London, my first thought is she's from London, Ontario. When my friend says to me she's going to Paris for the weekend, you've got to clarify, is she going to Paris, France, or Paris, Ontario? And 9 times out of 10, your friend is going to Paris, Ontario. So that's just, a funny little fact there. Lots of European town and city names ended up in Ontario. Question 6. Is there a work of world literature on your TBR? Yes, but not anything published recently. I read a lot of older books, hence the name of my channel, The Dusty Bookshelf. The books I read are from the Dusty Bookshelf. So nothing recent on my shelf. I've got some Balzac up there to read. I've got Colette to read. I've got The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. That is forever on my TBR. And the vast majority of the books on my TBR are not published in Canada, which in a way makes them world literature. And sometimes I would even dare to consider French-Canadian literature world literature, just because it's not originally from my language. It's not from English originally. So this was a fun tag. I'm supposed to tag some people now, so I'll do that. I would like to tag Janelle from All the World's a Page. I would like to tag Matthew from Mayberry Book Club, and I would like to tag the Book Zealots. So thank you, Sean, for tagging me in this. This was a fun tag to do this evening, and I hope everybody has a lovely night.